Yeah. Paṇḍitā was in Chia. A John said the Mura Sila no sati. Me the lie. Majuma people. Tanshim singing me the car. Did the aya one that pity a GJ pillar, Saravadi. What about it?
This afternoon, the Sayadaw talked about one way of arousing rapture through the recollection of the purity of one's conduct. If one is able to reflect on how impeccable one has been in trying to maintain the purity of one's conduct, then one could be filled with much joy and satisfaction.
Ila take ye chune khamha Tiku Aguya Bade Aguya Bule Fialete do Kalaga Muda de Yadia Jana Vido Tadaria Nuja Tawagani Poavido Yahampi can you Yahandiari Jin Dongyama Digani says him Digani says him Kudilago Senior Nidi are BD PB Yahana Ati had a Piedorali, Targari to show you pure.
Recollection of the purity of one's conduct bears primary importance during emergencies. There is a story of a young man who, upon listening to a discourse given by the Dhamma, by the Buddha, was filled with faith and was also struck by a great sense of spiritual urgency. And he eventually renounced the worldly life to take up the robes. Seems that he led a life of purity as a bhikkhu. And toward the end of his life, he recollected his virtue in terms of purity of conduct, which led to an upsurge of great satisfaction and rapture. He took that as his object of meditation, and it seems that as he lay on his deathbed, he went through the different stages of insight and managed to get fully enlightened as an arahant.
Toya Jali Kuma Red Pubo Yode Tea Samanadama called a Gilita Nino Yandiari You didn't see Sasane Lola Tavido Atoni Tugaro Lover of the Saja Gilitari Yo Vavi don't know so keep your own three Miogenet. I took them. သူရဲ့မကြီးခေါ်မလားညီငယ်ရဲ့ဇနီးပေါ့လေသူရဲ့ညီငယ်ဇနီးကအိမ်ကနေပြီးတော့သူအပ်ခဲ့တဲ့ပစ္စည်းတွေရလို့တဲ့အနေနဲ့လောဘတွေဖြစ်နေတယ်ဒီကိုယ်တော်ကြီးသာသနာ့ဘောင်မပြောလို့ထွက်လာရင်ပစ္စည်းတွေခွဲဝေပေးရတော့ through ma never boyashi. A cono, a bicycle and a Kuroyizi go to that Mari Lubido at that kind. Dollar is Shibian. There are so there, nobody that is. Do that Mari ha Toya video wine eka, Kuroyi didn't know the only wine eka. Do damage to the chini dida. Kanatikama. Bema Bibabu. Davina Miao. Lusura, the Amakanja Meshiu. You know, Amakanja Meshivenero, Quello of Shifu. Dane do Amakanja Pileva. Niva, she the Chowdon the Ku, you will own the child of the chocolate. Only child of Joe, as a Rabalamian nameless or a sins up. Eddie no pine ma. Tilan is savage, 2 years jetty, carried him upset. Tu me ne, do ne, quite have only nice chivo. The Agilita Puri, Yobu, Yebu, Chandabu, who Agilitari, cheap, and a chivo.
To Tilan never the video.
Amen, no.
It seems that this young man was very ambitious. He felt a great sense of emptiness for the world and wanted to strive very hard to end samsaric existence in that very life. In other words, he was bent on becoming an arahant. So he retreated to a forest abode and strove very hard. Before he renounced the world, seems that he had given some of his property to his brother, his younger brother. Now his sister-in-law suddenly became very greedy. Now that they had this newfound property, they were quite well off. But she was afraid that her brother-in-law, who is now a bhikkhu, might change his mind later on and disrobe and come back to lay life. She was afraid that their property might be depleted significantly because of such an eventuality. So she schemed to consolidate their position. Finally, she struck an idea. She called some thugs and muggers and paid them and promised them a handsome prize if they would kill this bhikkhu. So the thugs went in search of this diligent bhikkhu in the forest. Finally, they found him, surrounded him, and was at the point of killing him. But the bhikkhu said, "Please wait a minute. Could you please wait a while? I haven't finished my job yet." And the thug said, "How can we wait? We have a task to do, and we must finish it quickly." And he said, and again the bhikkhu pleaded for time, but they would not listen. And so finally the bhikkhu said, okay, well, maybe you just leave me here for a night or two and come back and kill me. But they were adamant. We cannot buy that. Can you give us a guarantee that you will not run away? And the poor bhikkhu was without any possession except for his bowl and ropes. And how could he give a guarantee? So he thought of an idea and he took a huge boulder and smashed both his thighs so that he could not move. Satisfied with this guarantee, the band of thugs retreated and allowed this sole bhikkhu to continue his striving. So you can see how this bhikkhu, motivated by a great desire to uproot the kilesas, has been able to perform this very brave and courageous act.
Chúng ta tâm thì khả ta là đó tim hai cháu lùm hậu bảo tu cháu đã được khu sĩ tu mà ga giá đi ai đâu lâu cái sao mà bị đều cái gì ta đi xí này đi cái gì ta đi xí này ra của tu dùng một sẽ sống này ra tu bảo ảo thì đó chúng ta tâm thì cái dấu đi ta lựa tì đó cái gì ta này tì ra tì sẽ sống xìa cao này sao là bảo này ấy đi bảo nhiều tì bị đó tu yêu này yêu nóတရားလေးရတဲ့အထိကိလေသာတွေကုန်တဲ့အထိတူတရားအားထုတ်လို့တားမြစ်တဲ့သဘောပါပဲခဏသိခံဖို့ရပါဒီမှာမေတ္တာရက်ခံတဲ့သဘောပါပဲ
When the bhikkhu requested the thugs to leave him alone for some time, it was not because he was scared of dying. What he was scared of was the kilesas. He had this life and he had not finished his work. The kilesas were still very much alive and kicking. And he dread the thought of having to die with the kilesas yet not uprooted. That was his main concern. It was a very contemptible thought of dying without having first uprooted the kilesas. And it was on account of this that he requested the band of thugs to give him time so that he could finish his job.
ဘုံလုံးချောင်းလုံးကျိုးသွားတယ်အယိုးတွေကျိုးသွားတယ်ဆိုတော့စဉ်းစားကြည့်ပေါ့ဘယ်လောက်များနာရှာမလဲဆိုတာအခုယောဂီတွေတောင်းတော့ရှိသေးတယ်တို့ကြဟိုနေ့ကပူဒီနာပူရာထုံချင်းစသည်ပေါ့လေအဲ့ဒါတွေတော့မသိမခံနိုင်ဘူးတို့ကြရွှေ့လိုက်ပြင်းလိုက်ပြောင်းလိုက်မျိုးမျိုးလုပ်နေတာပေါ့လေတော့အဲ့ဒါမျိုးတွေတို့ကြမျက်စိပွင့်ပြီးတော့ဟိုကြည့်ကြည့်လိုက်အချိန်ကလည်းပဲကြာခဲ့ဆိုပြီးတော့တွေးလိုက်ပေါ့ဒီမျိုးဖြစ်နေတာအဲ့ဒီပေါင်တစ်ချောင်းကျိုးတဲ့ဒဏ်ရာနဲ့အခုတရားထုတ်လို့ပေါ်တဲ့ခံစားမှုနဲ့ရှင်းကြည့်ပေါ့ဘယ်လောက်များမလဲဆိုတာကိုရောကြီးသိခံရှာတယ်ဒီကလည်းပဲတရားရှိမှနေတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်ကြီးဆိုတော့အမြဲပြမှတ်နေတာနာတာလေးလည်းမှတ်မှာပေါ့အခြားပေါ်တာလည်းမှတ်မှာပေါ့ဘယ်လောက်များနာရှာမလဲဆိုတာပေါ့လေတတိမလွတ်ဘူးတတိမလွတ်တော့အဲ့ဒီတတိကဖြစ်လာနိုင်တဲ့ကိလေသာကိုသူကတားထားတာကိလေသာအရင်တွေကိုသူကတားတာပေါ့တတိနဲ့တားတဲ့အဲ့လိုတားတော့မှသူကဆင်းရဲနေမိမိရရမ်းပြတဲ့ချိန်ကစပြီးတော့အခုအထိ Yahan Dila, Jupjeta, Yashidala, Banga Duma, Dilama, Anasamashi, a colon shenida, Dila is in Jera, oh, went a later, they went a Pidi, Shavida, Gija. Pidi, Pietoi, two Kazare with an arrow, the Nini, your daughter, Teta, Uyogi, and an any article with an arimia, Jodavi, solution. Nitty are the Pidi, Pilareca. Take on. When I eat that you meet a camion, when I might go, come in. Baba Mamuro, Chodo. And if you let a BD go back to shoot up, knitting, I. Can I jam it? Can I get it? Mayana Sheta. Tila Palo Aguya, the Serachiva. Tila singing of BD go say you the Kajaro, Ubadan is in David and also Yana Sheta.
Tila Masin Hindu Balo.
Money.
Tila Masin. To Nalula.
Naluram Hobo. The Galuti Luci, Tilana, Yoni, see the Lava,
You can imagine how excruciating the pain will be coming from that deep wound of fractured or smashed bones. There are some yogis here who cannot exercise much patience when they are sitting. And they sit for a while and there's a little discomfort here and some itches there, and they start to want to change when they shift their postures. Look at how much pain this bhikkhu had to suffer, and yet he exercised the utmost forbearance in looking at it. Since he had been one who renounced the world with deep faith, he must have had been quite diligent in trying to be mindful since his renunciation. His mindfulness, perhaps, at that point was quite strong. And so he was still continuing his meditation in spite of that excruciating pain which he might have been suffering from. He looked at it and he watched, and it was extremely painful. But he never gave up. He looked and watched, and while he was watching, he recalled he reflected on his virtue. He reflected on whether he had broken any of the bhikkhu's precepts ever since he renounced the world. And to his delight, he found that he was perfectly pure. He had not committed a single offense. Upon realizing that, he was filled with tremendous satisfaction and rapture. As you know, when there is such an overwhelming upsurge of rapture, the painful sensations in the fractured limbs receded, and the prominent object then became the feelings of rapture. So he changed his object to that of rapture, and he watched and noted rapture, happiness, and so forth. And as he noted it, his insights became matured, and speeding up in momentum, he broke through and realized the Four Noble Truths, and finally became an arahant within a very short space of time.
Vipassana chanda, mechanda puchanda, yalure bukumya. Tila rivoli, churi mieta wote yechivara. Tila mieli, teatolo, lueli, the maripi lueli, nyamponi live, the yechivara. The yechone hajaro. Tila jumbo, the adu de yadora, the Canadian live, the agoyara tila. Amale only the hodila, Amale. Sana nyadazi tavido. But they are doing solution, but the other who are shouting about, okay, really.
The moral of the story is that one should try to establish a good foundation in respect of one's sila. If there is a good foundation in sila, then your efforts in meditation will prove to be very fruitful. The more you meditate, the more effort you put in, the deeper you get concentrated, and the deeper your practice will go in terms of insights. Not that it's very difficult to maintain purity in the 5 precepts. If one is able to cultivate a sense of considerateness for other beings, then it will not be a great big deal to try to refrain from breaking any of the precepts.
Jaga no sati, Imi Picasso Jamu Pamatata, always in your level, PDD, Pipoisiva.
The next way of arousing rapture is the recollection of one's own generosity.
Jaganudri Bhavana Bhajam Nitya Pididi Pifu Sura Diludana Kudu Pude Kamha Parami Mio Yuja Kongo and Puma Leve Nitya Pididi Poil of Shipare Parami Mio Sura Mimi Kuju Nene Mangekwa Shivene Mia Chanda Zi Chung Halago Bawa Lumio Boa Sierra Malumia by Jung Halago, Yipio Puya Dana Gudu Muda Parami Dana, Mimia de Dana, Sunamare, Mimia de Saga, Sunamare. When one is performing an act of charity, the motivation behind that act is very important. There are various types of charity. Some types of charity which are motivated by selfish desires may not be very
meritorious. If, however, one performs an act of charity without having any selfish motivations at all, but wishing for the welfare of others, the welfare and happiness of others, or wishing for liberation from suffering, then that act of charity can be very meritorious. This, in fact, is the criteria for judging whether that act falls under the category of parami or not. It is only parami if those noble motivations are involved. And so, if one is doing charity in that way, one can be filled with gladness and happiness due to one's generosity.
သူကတော့ဒုက္ခကာလခေါ်တဲ့အစာရည်စာခေါင်းပါငတ်မွတ်တဲ့ဘေးတွေများစိုက်လာပြီဆိုရင်ကိုယ်ရှိတဲ့ပစ္စည်းလေးမုံမြတ်မြတ်ပစ္စည်းလေးတွေပေါ့လေတရင်သုံးဘော်တွေလှူရတဲ့အခါမျိုးဒီလိုအခါမျိုးတောင်မှကရှာရှာပါပါမုံမြတ်မြတ်ထားပြီးတော့လှူနိုင်တယ်ဆိုတာပေါ့လေဝန်တာရတာလူတွေဖို့ရဆိုလို့ရှိရင်အဲ့ဒီလိုဒုက္ခကာလမျိုးမှာတိလရှိတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တွေလှူရကျင့်တဲ့ပြည့်စုံတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တွေလှူရတာပါအဲ့လိုအလှူဒါနမျိုးစဉ်းစားလိုက်လို့ရှိရင်တိတ်ပီတိတွေဖြစ်တာအာယိပီတိတွေဖြစ်တာဒီဥကြောင့်ကအဘိယဒုဒ္ဒကာမဏိမင်းဟာစစ်တိုက်တုံးတောထဲမှာပေါ့လေစီပြေးနေတော့ရှားပါတဲ့အခါပေါ့လူ2ယောက်နဲ့မြင်း3ယောက်စားပေါ့လေစားဖို့ပြေးနေတော့မှလူကပုဂ္ဂိုလ်ကြွလာတာနဲ့ပေါ့လေလှူလိုက်တာသူလှူတဲ့ပစ္စည်းတွေထဲမှာဆိုလို့ရှိရင်အဲ့ဒီခါလှူရတာတော့ဝင်းတာတာမရှိဘူးတဲ့တိတ်ဝင်းတာတာပဲတဲ့မှာထာဂရာတွေထဲမှာမှတ်တမ်းတွေပြပါတယ်တော့မှတ်ချက်တွေပြပါတယ်တော့ရှားရှားပါပါဖြစ်တဲ့အခါမျိုးမုံမြတ်မြတ်ထားပြီးတော့များလှူရမယ်ဆိုရင်တိတ်ပီတိဖြစ်တာအဲ့ဒါလိုပီတိဖြစ်နေလောက်အောင်စွန့်ကြဲပေးကနဲ့စာကကိုအာယုံပြုမိလို့ရှိရင်တိတ်ပြီးတော့ပီတိတွေဖြစ်တတ်တယ်တဲ့သူတို့ဆိုပါတယ်အဲ့ဒါလိုနီးနဲ့လည်းပဲပီတိတွေဖြစ်ပွားစီပါတဲ့အဘေကကမင်းမင်းတို့စစ်ပြီးတော့ဟုတ်တယ်စစ်တိုက်နေရတာသူကရှုံးတော့မရှုံးဘူးနည်းနည်းဆုတ်ပေးရတာပေါ့ဟုတ်ပြီတော့သူဘယ်လိုနိုင်နာရှုံးတာရေးမကြည့်ဘူးဘယ်သူတွေ့နေလဲယန္တာတစ်ပါးလာပြီးတော့လူခံတော့အိုးယဟန္တာ
Charity is especially important during times of great need. For example, if there is a drought and there is a great scarcity of food, then this is an excellent opportunity to perform a meritorious act of charity. If you are a renunciate and you happen to be offered some food, then by sharing that little food that you have with your fellow Dhammafarers, and on such an occasion, it can be a great source of happiness. For it may be very difficult during that time. And when you recollect that act of merit later on, you can be filled with much joy and satisfaction in having been able to sacrifice even the little that you had so that your comrades may enjoy some degree of comfort. There is a story of a king of Sri Lanka in the old days. His name was Abhayagamini. And it seems that one day he was involved in a battle. And as he was making a hasty retreat, he had only limited supplies with him. And while he was going through the forest with so little food, he chanced upon a bhikkhu who was going for alms round. The bhikkhu, it seems, was an arahant. And the king was full of faith, and even though he had scarcely enough for himself and his horse and his attendant, he nevertheless sacrificed his part of his share to that monk. Later on, after that incident, much later on, he recollected his deed, his meritorious deed, and indeed, he even said before his death that there was no other deed of charity that he cherished as much as that particular act when he was making that hasty retreat. Though he had given great gifts of splendor when he was in the palace, compared to the situation whereby he sacrificed that very valuable and scarce food supply in order to make an offering to the monk, it was incomparable.
Di chene pate bido Bohemiya ko dwe li di thai bido phyo chin pa le da pemen lo achain ka malung lak da ne phot lo ma phyo da ba bu. Chin chok ka do la yauk bido a thuk de yogi mya zayit ka pyat pi so yin taya ka le be achain ni ka kaung ni set a thuk lo chi yin taya ni piet saung twa nain de. Zayit ka le be set sia ma shi ho lun kai deနှစ်တရားပေါ့ဒီခုတော့ပေါ်ပါတယ်အဲ့တော့ဘာလို့ လဲဆိုတော့သူတို့ကိုကြိတ်ပြီးတော့ပေါ့ဒီကမ္ဘာထဆရာတွေကစည်ထောက်ရတယ်စည်ထောက်တော့တရားများရသွားပြီပြည့်စုံသွားပြီဆိုအိုးသိတ်ဝင်တာပဲခါလေရှားပါတဲ့ပုံကိုယ်ကြီးထောက်ပလိုက်ရတာသူတရားတွေနေရာကျဆိုသိတ်ဝင်တာတယ်စာကနုတ္တိဘာဝနာတွေပွားတာပြီးတော့အဲ့ဒီလိုပုံကိုယ်တွေကိုပဲတရားခက်ခဲမရှိရအောင်ဆိုပြီးတော့ငွေမတဲပြီးတော့ပေါ့လေဆောင်ရွက်လို့အောင်မြင်တဲ့အချက်ကလေးတွေပေါ့လေဘုန်းကြီးကိုယ်တွေအများကြီးရှိပါတယ်ဒါတွေသိဝင်တာတယ်အဲ့ဒါတွေရှားပါတဲ့ပုံကိုယ်တွေအခုလိုတရားနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ခက်ခဲကြုံနေတဲ့အခါမှာအပိချီးမြှောက်လို့ရပြီဆိုသိဝင်တာဒါမှ
There are a couple of personal experiences that Asada would like to share with all of you. Seems that some years ago, maybe many years ago in Rangoon, when the yekta or the meditation center was still in the process of slow development, there was a little problem related to supporting the yogis who were practicing in the center. People were poor at that time, and the yogis could not afford to pay for their food and accommodation and things like that. But some of the yogis were making really good progress, and it was such a great pity to see them leaving the yekta because they could not afford to continue their stay. So what happened was that the meditation teachers got together and they pooled their resources and supported those yogis with strong potential. And indeed, getting support and being able to continue their practice, they really made tremendous progress. And when they succeeded in attaining what they wanted, the meditation teachers were filled with great joy and rapture. So, and there are many other cases similar to this, including also the giving of inspiration and encouragement and instruction to yogis who are in trouble of some sort. As you know, your practice sometimes is fantastic and sometimes it's at a very low level. You are going up and down, and when you're really down, you need some inspiration and encouragement. And as a meditation teacher, if one's encouragement or words of inspiration can help in any way to get the yogi out of the difficult situation and to see the yogi later make good progress, that itself can be really very fulfilling and satisfying. That too can lead to great joy and rapture.
ပြီးတော့ဒေဝတာနုစတိတဲ့ဒေဝတာနုစတိဆိုတာကတော့သူ့အတိုင်းဘာသာပြန်ရဲ့နတ်တွေကိုဖမတရိယာချင်းဆိုတာတော့ဒီလိုပြမှာပါပဲဒါပေမဲ့ဒီလိုတော့မဟုတ်ပါဘူးအဓိပ္ပာယ်ကနတ်ပြည်လောကပြမပြည်လောကရောက်နေကြတဲ့ထက်တန်းစားပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တွေဟာအလယ်ကသူတို့ရောက်နေကြတာမဟုတ်ဘူးအခြေခံကောင်းတာပြည်ကောင်းကျိုးရဆိုးတာပြည်ဆိုးပြရဆိုတဲ့ဒီလိုတတ္တတရားရှိကြတယ်တတ္တတရားအခြေခံပြီးတော့မကောင်းတာတွေရှောင်ရှားပြီးတော့ကောင်းတာတွေဆောင်ပွားကြတာဒါနကုသိုလ်တွေလုပ်ကြတာသီလတွေစောင့်တည်ကြတာတည်တဲ့တိုးမြင့်ပြီးတော့ဘာဝနာတရားတွေအားထုတ်ကြတာဒီလိုတတ္တသီလအစရှိတဲ့ကုသိုလ်ဒုတွေကြောင့်သူတို့ဟာနတ်ပြည်လောကမြမပြည်လောကရောက်ကြရတာသူတို့မှာတတ္တသီလအစရှိတဲ့တရားတွေရှိသလိုငါမှာလည်းပဲမိမိမှာလည်းပဲဒီတရားတွေရှိတယ်ဒီတရားတွေမသေးလာဘူးတတ္တမသေးလာဘူးသီလမသေးလာဘူးအခြားအခြားကုသိုလ်တရားတွေလည်းမသေးလာဘူးဆိုပြီးတော့ပေါ့လေနတ်တွေမှာရှိတဲ့သီလတတ္တသီလအစရှိတဲ့တရားတွေကိုတက်တည်ထူပြီးတော့ပေါ့လေစံနမူနာယူပြီးတော့ကိုပိဋိတွေဖြစ်အောင်ပေါ့လေဆင်ញင်တာဆင်ញင်လိုက်လို့ရှိရင်နေ့တည်းရတဲ့ပိဋိတွေဖြစ်လာတတ်တယ်ဒါကိုရှိမှပိဋိဖြစ်တာမရှိရင်ဖြစ်ဘူးတတ္တလည်းရှိမှသီလလည်းရှိမှအခြားခြားကုသိုလ်တရားတွေလည်းပဲရှိမှဒါမှဖြစ်တာတတိဝိရိယတတိသမာဓိပညာပေါ့လေဒါတွေရှိမနာဝန်တာလား
The next way that can bring about rapture is by recollecting the virtues of the devas. Now this can appear to be rather deceiving. When we talk about devas here, we mean both Devas in the heavenly realms, in the celestial realms, as well as Brahmas in the Brahma realms. The virtues of the Devas or Brahmas start before they actually gain rebirth in those realms. When they were still human beings, they had had great faith in karma, great faith that if good is done, then one will be rewarded, and if evil is done, then one will have to suffer evil consequences. And having that faith deeply embedded in them, they strove to avoid doing those things which are unskillful. They tried to maintain purity of conduct. And some of them even tried to develop meditation, concentration, and gaining absorptions in the jhana. They eventually were reborn in the Brahma realms. Some did other sorts of meditations, which also was a great which also helped to bring them to Devaland or to the Brahma realms. So, when we talk about virtues of the Devas or the Brahmas, we refer to those virtues that they cultivated when they were human beings prior to their rebirth in those celestial realms. And so by reflecting on their virtues of faith, charity, effort, perseverance, morality, concentration and mindfulness and so forth, we can compare their virtues with our own. If indeed we too are endowed with faith, with charity, with perseverance, purity in conduct, concentration and so forth, then we are at par with the Devas in one way. When we are able to reflect in this way, sometimes we can be filled with much satisfaction and joy.
ပြီးတော့ဥပသမ္မာနုစတိဥပသမ္မာနုစတိဆိုတာကိလေသာငြိမ်းပုံတွေကိုဆင်ញင်တာပေါ့တက်တန်းစားအနေနဲ့ဆိုလို့ရှိရင်ဥပသမ္မာဆိုတာကိလေသာလုံးဝငြိမ်းတာနိဗ္ဗာန်တစ်ခုရှိတာပါပဲနိဗ္ဗာန်ရဲ့ကိလေသာဆင်းရဲဝဆင်းရဲတွေငြိမ်းပုံပေါ့ဒီဆင်ញင်မိတဲ့အခါသိအားရတယ်အဲ့ဒီအဆင့်မဟုတ်တောင်မှဇန်တရားတွေအားထုတ်တော့တမာပနဲ့ကိလေသာတွေတော်တော်ကင်းကွာပြီးတော့တချို့များဆိုလို့ရှိရင်နှစ်ပေါင်း60နှစ်ပေါင်း80များကိလေသာဖြစ်ခွင့်မရဘူးဆိုတာကိုစိတ်ထဲကိလေသာပေါ်မလာဘူးတမာပဒီနဲ့တခါတည်းဓမ္မတားထားတာအမြဲတမ်းသူတို့ကဇာဏတမာပဝင်စားနေတာကိုအဲ့ဒီလိုပုံကိုယ်တွေမှာအမြဲတမ်းစိတ်ကကြည်ပြီးတော့ပိဋိတွေဘယ်လောက်ဖြစ်လိုက်မလဲဆိုတာစဉ်းစားကြည့်ပေါ့ဒါမပြောနဲ့အခုဝိပဿနာအားထုတ်တဲ့ပုံကိုယ်တွေနိဝရဏတရားလေးကင်းဝေးစင်ကြယ်ပြီးတော့စိတ်ကလေးတော်တော်လေးတန့်လာရင်ပဲဖြစ်လိုက်တာပိဋိအားကြီးဖြစ်တာပဲငါအရင်နဲ့မတူအရင်ကအပြင်လောကမှာဆိုရင်လက္ခဏာစိတ်တွေပူပန်ညစ်ထေးနေတာပဲအခုတရားနေတဲ့ရောက်လာတဲ့အခါအေးလိုက်တာဆိုတာပေါ့လေတရားနယ်ရဲ့အေးပုံလေးတွေပေါ့လေနည်းနည်းတရားဝင်ပြီးတော့အားထုတ်ကြည့်လို့အေးပုံလေးတွေပေါ့လေဆင်ញင်ပြီလို့ရှိရင်ပိဋိတွေလေးဖြစ်တာသိကောင်းလာတယ်ပါတကယ်တရားရလို့ကိုယ်မှာတကယ်အေးတာလေးတွေများသိရင်ဘယ်လောက်များကျင့်ရမလဲဆိုတာတွေးကြည့်ပေါ့အဲ့ဒီလိုကိလေသာငြိမ့်ပုံကိုဆင်ញင် Paṇḍitā Ayunပြုပြီးတော့လည်းပီတိတွေဖြစ်ပွားစေရမယ်
We have one more way of arousing rapture. That is by reflecting on the coolness or peace of the cessation of This, of course, in the ultimate sense, refers to Nibbana. It is a reflection on one's previous Nibbanic experience. Having gone to practice and having gone through all the various levels of suffering, to be able to recollect this great peace of cessation can bring about a lot of joy and satisfaction, a lot of rapture within oneself. Even those who have not yet attained Nibbana, those who walk the path of samatha, of tranquil meditation, can experience a superior sort of peace when compared to worldly pleasures. Those who are successful, for example, in attaining the jhanas and continually get absorbed for extended lengths of time in the jhanas, will find their minds very pure and clean, even though they may not be absorbed in jhanas. There are accounts of people who are so skilled and dexterous in staying in absorption, in jhanic absorption, that for 60 or 70 years, even when they are not absorbed, their minds are never invaded by the kilesas. This, of course, can be a source of disillusion, or rather delusion, for a person who is so skilled in samatha. So this sort of peace or coolness of the mind that is free from the attacks of the kilesas is something which is really extraordinary. If you can reflect on how peaceful, how cool the mind is, how pure and clear, then it can bring about great joy. Not to talk about people who attain the jhanas. Even some of you, yogis, who have come to meditate this Vipassana meditation, will be able to experience a sense of clarity and tranquility of mind when the hindrances are sufficiently put aside for an extended period of time. If you reflect on your past experiences of how the mind had been very pure and clean and free from the kilesas, you can also be filled by joy and happiness. If indeed you have really gone very deep into the practice and really completed all your Vipassana insights, then you can truly appreciate what is meant by reflecting on the cessation of suffering.
အဲ့ဒီနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ပြောစရာတွေအများကြီးရှိပါတယ်ဥပဒနာနဲ့ပတ်သက်ပြီးတော့ဖြစ်ပေါ်လာတဲ့ပီတိတွေဆိုတာတမယ်တဲ့နဲ့မပြည့်နိုင်တဲ့ a pure mute chanda mute. Kamago, pure Kamago chanda, Piazinza Kama. Take on with them, Timo. Puma when do it. The dear chanda yoga, Piazinza lady, Booby, the Ayamuria Chili. Take what child. Tamalo, Kilita Yemua. Piazinza Lucy, BD Pity, so that we don't that elecane.
Even without any special reflection, if you're doing your Vipassana practice, you will have the opportunity to experience rapture when your mind becomes really very calm and clean, purified and cleansed of the kilesas. And then you may, when you do experience that sort of rapture that comes out of purity of mind, you may at times find yourself comparing with the happiness that you may have enjoyed in the world. You will see how gross it is, that the happiness that is experienced in relation to worldly pleasures they are rather agitative, and there is something burning about them. It's not cool. It's not like the rapture of coolness that comes out of purity of mind. And when you do indeed reflect or make this comparison, you can also be filled with rapture.
Narakuga, Luka Pogala, Vipassana. Doda as one a Chandane Poku, Luka Poku cover, Eri Poku, Niwaya Hude. Where Doda Pini de Pokuma, Poku says in her. Chicken and Mitataka Mapao, 2 years, Josie wa Lula Mitataka Maparo. Sika Choka Kachipian. So Pimumshi. Doda Swane, Emana Janana. Ethel Doda Swane, Janane Boku ha. You didn't a boku, the leve, you the Amamadibu. They are Naya Mamadibu. They are to Amamadibu. You are Ethel Chinida. Ethel Bokuri, Shauma, Logama. Doda Swane, Janane Boku, Niba near the Bokuri, Velu Nidro. Babe, your Himele, Bashun Himele. Mera say any of my Eddie you, Eddie Bogu, you wish on Dhamma be deep.
Another factor that will conduce to the arousal of rapture within is avoiding the company of rough or coarse people. Rough or coarse people here refer to those who have a bad temper, or hot-tempered persons. Those who become poor victims of anger and aversion. A person who is overwhelmed by anger is totally devoid of any feelings of metta or compassion. Imagine living with such a person, completely devoid of metta and compassion. How can there ever be a chance for rapture or joy or happiness to arise? In this world there are many people who become so overwhelmed by anger that they do not know the benefit or appropriateness of paying respects to those who are worthy of respect, or to listen to Dhamma talk, or even to meditate. People become so full of anger that they cannot discern wholesome activities from unwholesome ones. So we should try to avoid the company of such people.
နောက်တစ်ခုကစိနိတ္တပုဂ္ဂလစေဝနတာဆိုတာပေါ့လေစိနိတ္တပုဂ္ဂလဆိုတာအဒေါဇဗဟုလပုဂ္ဂိုလ်ပါပဲအဒေါဇဆိုတာမေတ္တာကိုပြောတာမေတ္တာတွေပြန်ပြောပြီးတော့ညဉ့်ညဉ့်ညောညောနဲ့စိတ်ထားသိမ်မွေ့တဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တဲ့စိတ်ထားသိမ်မွေ့လို့ရှိရင်ကိုယ်မူရလည်းသိမ်မွေ့တော့တာပဲနှုတ်မူရလည်းပဲအများအပြားသိမ်မွေ့တော့တာပဲအရင်ကတော့စိတ်ထားမေတ္တာတွေပြန်ပြောပြီးတော့ညဉ့်ညောတဲ့နုညံ့တဲ့စိတ်ထားရှိတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်ဒါအရေးကြီးဆုံးပါပဲအဲ့ဒီပုဂ္ဂိုလ်နဲ့နီးစပ်လို့ရှိရင်အေးတယ်ပီတိတွေဖြစ်တယ်အဲ့ဒီပုဂ္ဂိုလ်ရွေးပြီးတော့ပေါင်းပါတဲ့အဲ့လိုပေါင်းလို့ရှိရင်ပီတိတွေဖြစ်တတ်တယ်
Keeping the company of refined persons can also be conducive to the arousing of rapture. Refined persons here refer to those who have metta within them, metta in their hearts. Such people always have a deep sense of considerateness and loving care for other beings. And because of the warmth and love of the heart, this is manifested in their actions and their speech. Out of considerateness for other people's feelings, for other beings, such refined individuals are able to relate in a very subtle and sweet way. Gaining the company of such persons must be very fulfilling, for then one can have the opportunity to be in an aura of love and warmth, which will conduce to the arising of happiness and rapture within us.
နောက်တစ်ခုကတော့ပစာဒနိယသုတ်တန္တပိကျွခဏတာဆိုတာဘုရားတရားတန်ခါယရဏသုံးပါးရဲ့ဂုဏ်ကျေးဇူးတွေဖော်ပြတာအထူးအားဖြင့်ဒီလိုလက်တွေ့ကျင့်သုံးရတဲ့တရားတွေရဲ့ဂုဏ်ကျေးဇူးတွေကိုပေါ့လေဖော်ပြတာသတိပဋ္ဌာန်တရားအထုတ်ကြည့်ရနိုင်တဲ့အကျိုးတွေပေါ့လေဒါဒီဖော်ပြချက်တွေပေါ့အဲ့ဒီဖော်ပြချက်တွေကိုဆင်ញင်တာပေါ့လေကြားနာပြီးတော့ဆင်ញင်တာဆွေးနွေးပြီးတော့ဆင်ញင်တာစာအုပ်ကြည့်ပြီးတော့ဆင်ញင်တာပေါ့လေဒါမျိုးတွေပေါ့အဲ့ဒါတွေဆင်ញင်လိုက်လို့ရှိရင်အကျိုးတွေသိရတော့တိတ်ပြီးတော့ပီတိတွေဖြစ်တာဘုရားယုံကြည်တဲ့ဘုရားစိတ်ယုံကြည်တဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်ဘုရားကုံတော်တွေအောက်ပြီးတဲ့အသိအားရတာတရားရဲ့ဂုဏ်တော်တွေတန်ခါရဲ့ဂုဏ်တော်တွေပေါ့လေဒါတွေအာရုံပြုလိုက်ရလို့ရှိရင်တိတ်ပြီးတော့ဂုဏ်တော်တွေမဟုတ်အဲ့ဂုဏ်တော်တွေကိုဖော်ပြတဲ့တုတ်တန်တွေပေါ့လေဆင်ញင်ရတာတိတ်ပြီးတော့ပီတိဖြစ်တယ်အဲ့ဒါပီတိဖြစ်ခြင်းအကြောင်းတရားပါပဲ
တုတ်တန်ကိုဆင်ញင်
ပစာဒနိယသုတ်တန္တပိကျွခဏတာ
Another way of arousing rapture within oneself is by reflecting on the suttas which conduce to faith, that will make you have a lot of faith and reverence for the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. There are many suttas belonging to this category. There are suttas which describe the virtues of the Buddha, and for those who have a lot of faith, by merely reflecting on such a sutta, one can be filled with much joy and happiness. Also with the Dhamma, there are certain suttas, for example the Satipatthana Sutta, which talk about the benefits that one can enjoy through the practice of the Dhamma. Then reflecting on such benefits too can bring about happiness and joy. There are some suttas which talk about, relate very inspiring stories of the Sangha, the community of noble ones. And by reading them or reflecting on them, one can also be filled with inspiration, leading of course to rapture and happiness.
And also Tattati Muttata Sara Toya Tiny Oriabo Limio Loma Niti Aya de Pidi Pipozi Boya Miera Sikaino Tara, Da Lipi Tara. A little baby or Guresa Bido Poyality Posella Bido Shumachi Absent. Pinna and Niwaranadiari Petoni, Niwaranadiari Kelushi or Pidi Pite Saravoli. Very Pidi Pipoya body. Toa leve Macalina, Ya leve Macalina, Tiny Macalina, A Macalina, near Tanarima body, Macali Panida. Da Piti Uria Tambozini, a Piti Tambozini, P. A Miedasi body, Uza baby body. Man, Daniel the security sheet. Either resolution and pity pillar about it.
Finally, if one is able to firmly and consistently incline the mind towards the development of rapture, then our aim can also be realized. This, of course, comes with the understanding that rapture will arise when the mind is sufficiently cleansed of the kilesas. And in order to purify the mind of the kilesas, one has to put in energy to be mindful from moment to moment so that there can be concentration. And that will make sure that the kilesas are kept at bay. So this really means that in order for rapture to arise, one must be fully committed to this task of activating firm mindfulness from moment to moment, whatever one may be doing, whether sitting or walking or standing or lying down or doing other activities.
Now so Jaumabe, Dine Pidi Tamosi Pichi, Jau set a meal, song that hobby baby. Dine David Dojaus of Ching level Pieta baby.
So this is the 11th and final way to arouse rapture. This is all for tonight.